Hey guys, so as you all know, we went to Srebrenica on Sunday, and there was the funeral procession 2 days ago. And after Sunday, actually, I had decided that I wanted to make another um, blog post, video diary, just get something out there to kind of, take some days to figure out my feelings and process everything before kind of making something else, because the blog post I made on Sunday was obviously very emotionally charged. Um, so on Monday we had the group therapy thing where Professors Lovely and Sullivan called us in the lobby and basically had everyone just share their feelings and
It's basically like an emotional group hug, like a spiritual group hug.
basically with no touching. um, but I brought up that I wanted after kind of seeing everything, I immediately was like, what can I do to help? And I want to do something. I can't just sit here and be like, oh, well, okay, I guess that's what happened. And Dr. Will, Professor Lovely, brought up the fact that that's a very Western way of thinking. That as soon as you find out something like this, your immediate thought is, what can I do to help? What can I do? And you don't always have to take action if you don't have all of the knowledge, which we don't. We only, we only do have one side of the story. And while yes, it is terribly sad that this happened,
They were
you know,
human lives.
and so many innocent people, died. It's nothing is gonna make that better, but there's also no point in hating the Dutch soldiers or the Serbs or because that's not gonna do anything. It's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because it was the hardest part about it for me personally was not only we talked about this, but the extreme empathy that we try
Mm-hmm.
and force ourselves into just initially almost in any situation, which isn't necessarily fair, but still deeply emotional. I think it's interesting because you have that knee jerk reaction of wanting to help. You can't help. You wish you could, but you can't. You can't understand it. You only have one side of the story,
Yeah.
so you're literally stuck in the literally. You're emotionally stuck in this rut where you really don't have any option but to just deal with the emotions that you're
Mm-hmm.
having, which is oftentimes anger, frustration, sorrow, all those things. So I think it's just
Yeah.
interesting. But I mean, we didn't have any background knowledge, which I think is probably the most impactful part of it for
Mm-hmm.
me was um, I phrased it like this before, but it was like walking into a Holocaust museum or onto a concentration camp like Auschwitz or something like that, and not even having any background knowledge on the Holocaust or World War II, and not knowing the full damage that it did. So it was I think it was that shock and awe factor that was the most difficult to deal with.
And it's crazy because we never learned anything about this, and it happened, 19 years ago today,
Yeah,
and
it's June 3rd. Oh, June or
July
July
11th.
11th
Yeah.
today. June.
So
So, oops.
I just, it's crazy because something so recent I feel would have been brought up at some point, but no one ever talks about this. No one ever talks about the Balkan Wars, and it kind of, I think it's because nobody talks about it that people are like, oh well, it can't have been that bad. And the truth is, it really was.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are calling Srebrenica the worst. Was it the worst
The
massacre
worst.
since World War II?
Yeah, since World War II.
And
The
nothing.
second worst in the 20th century.
Yeah, and nothing on it. There was even in the book that we were reading, "Burn This House." There was what, a paragraph
Yeah, tops.
on it.
Tops.
And
And at
yeah,
that point,
so
it's all statistical. It just says
yeah.
that there are this
Oh,
many
this
people
many
died,
people
and that's
died.
it. It wasn't a, it wasn't a soldier surrounded. There was no UN
Mm-mm.
explanation of the issue. There was no the UN confiscating their weapons. There was
Mm-hmm.
no helplessness conveyed in the situation. It was
No.
all just people died in this town. That was it.
Yeah.
And then we went there and we said, no, they weren't killed, they were murdered. You know, it was it was the Srebrenica massacre.
Yeah.
It wasn't
like, oh, this many people died. It was this many people were killed.
And it wasn't like they both attacked each other. It was a one-sided just slaughtering, you know? It's just...
Yeah, and, you know, and it's, again, I definitely mentioned this in the blog post, but it's one thing to say, oh, like, over 6,000 people were buried, like, found in mass graves and buried.
Multiple mass graves.
Multiple, yeah. And just yesterday, actually, we were talking to the guy from ICMP, and he said there, like, a lot of times what happens is there's one body in 4 different graves. And that's absolutely ridiculous. But,
I mean, it's
you know,
just like the inhumanity of it. You know, I mean, zero respect was treated to the people.
Yeah.
I mean, they were just, the cops are finding us. You know, the cops, the paramilitary, the military, the opposite side. They were catching on to where the mass graves were, so we had to transport them. And then all of a sudden,
just, like, took them and
limbs were taken. It's just, it's not even like they were burned or anything. You know, there was
nothing. We're just,
which I think is really interesting to think about. I never thought about that until now. Like, it wasn't like they were trying to get rid of all the evidence. They were just trying to hide it.
Yeah. But, yeah, it's another thing that I brought up was that we have all this information, but we don't know what to do with it, and that's frustrating. But after, you know, taking a few days, I realized I don't have all the information, I just had some of it. And the most I can do at this point with this, like, little bit of information that I have is share it. And not in a way that's hopefully, you know, like, hating one side and, like, kind of victimizing the other, because it was a war. You know, like, both sides suffered casualties. It's just this side, you know, this one specific event was just very, very tragic. So, you know, the most you can do with this information is share it, but the, like, unfortunate thing is, people keep making these mistakes.
Yeah.
And that is probably the worst part, is people know about this. People, I mean, all these people knew about World War II. A few of them, I'm sure, like, lived through it.
Absolutely.
And it just happened all over again.
I mean, it wasn't like, even... It was 50 years afterwards. I mean, 50 years, that's nothing. That's like 2 generations, basically. And right after World War II, 2 generations later, they're doing the exact same thing. You know, a generation and a half later, like we are now, it's still happening today.
Yeah.
Like, it's just... And the frustrating thing for me, especially, is, like, we learned so much about the Holocaust. We as Americans were so directly involved in the Balkans.
Oh, yeah.
But we never learned anything about it. And I had this realization today that, you know, if you ask an American, like, what the 90s were like, they would have been like, oh, Bill Clinton was the president, economic prosperity, you know, Lizzie McGuire, you know, like, all these things, you know? It's like, it's all good in the 90s, generally, because our economy was booming and technology was growing so fast, and so that was the American culture then. But you can't say anything like that here.
No.
I mean, what bright side is there to it?
It's
such a black and white difference. And to think that the United States was so involved with the happenings here. I mean, generally the peace treaties and so on and so forth. But
so
also,
some of that in a fairly positive way.
But also, we were on the UN Security Council. We're a big part in NATO. I mean, we sent the B-2 bombers into Bosnia. Like, we bombed Bosnia. Nobody's talking about that either. So it's like, I mean, it's just...
There's a lot of things about this that are just being hidden, and it frustrates me, because we should learn about this, you know? And, none of my history classes, and I took, like, honors, world history, and everything, and nothing. This did not come up. The only thing I heard about Sarajevo was, 1914, like Franz Ferdinand was killed.
Yeah.
That's it. Nothing. Like, I took AP World History. There was, like, I don't even remember reading a sentence about this. And
I just took a class, World History in 1945 to the present. We didn't even cover this. That's like the prime time to talk about this. But
yeah. Standing, but another thing, standing on the side of the street at the procession the other day, we were talking about how it definitely, things like this definitely made us understand how privileged we were. And, you know, back in the States, everyone's like, oh, you're so blessed, you're so privileged. I understand that. It's hard to do that until you come somewhere like here and you understand, no, like, I very much have this privilege and I need to better understand it and use it for good. There's no point in feeling bad and just sitting there and wallowing and being like, oh, I'm so sorry, I have this advantage. Like, don't do that. Use this advantage to make a difference and actually, like, do something positive.
It's all in the perspective, you know, like, in America, you can still be in a really terrible situation financially, emotionally, you know, God help you, whatever, but it isn't until you go to a completely other country or other corner of the world that you can even put that into perspective. So, I mean, I happen to have been in a very, you know, good status economically, financially, socially, all that kind of thing. You know, I've always been privileged. I mean, I'm a white girl, you know, like a middle class white girl. Like I have like no issues in the world. But then you go over like literally anywhere else and you realize how extreme that is because America is just so powerful, and like the phrase like superpower never really, or like hyperpower never made sense. It, like, I mean, yeah, I get it, like we're the most influential, but I always put it in perspective of like the UN, like we're on the Security Council, we have a lot of votes, you know, like all that kind of thing, but it was never put into perspective of we have it so good.
Yeah.
And we get a fair and balanced education, you know, we don't have to worry about that. Like, we get student loans from the government, we get, I mean, you know, it's like everything else in comparison just seems so trivial when 70%, like they said at the ICMP meeting yesterday, like probably 70% of the population in Bosnia-Herzegovina suffers from PTSD to some extent.
Yeah, just the other day, actually. I don't know if you were there or not, but I think my very first post I made, I wrote about it, how we went up to the Yellow Fortress and we had like, we got like the pizza, the bakery, and we're like, oh, let's go up there and eat it, and then they were, you know, they were up there for Ramadan because they fire off a cannon signaling the end of the fasting. Everyone was waiting up there, and I kind of went up, and like the rest of our group was just kind of like hanging out by the stairs, and there was a woman standing next to me, and she was standing there like kind of like this, like right by the entrance. I just kind of like casually turned to her, and I was like, oh, like, do you celebrate Ramadan? She was like, no, like, I'm just here with one of my friends. I was like, okay, cool. And she turns back to me. Yeah, she had like the accent, and she was like, do you know if the cannon's very loud or like anything? I was like, no, like, I mean, I'm sorry, like, I haven't been here, like, I don't really know. And the entire time she's just standing like this, and I was like, I don't know, I'm sorry, like, I'm not from around here, this is my first time coming up here. Yeah, and she was just like, oh, okay. And she like took a second, and she was just like, I'm sorry, I just, I hate loud noises, it reminds me of the war. And that was such a strange moment for me, because this woman was like maybe late 20s, early 30s.
Really?
Yeah. It was a young woman.
Oh my god.
Like, I don't know. If she was in her late 30s, like early 30s, she looked very young.
So she was a kid, but she was still... So she's been suffering with that all her life.
Yes.
Oh my god.
And that, like, it's not like most... And I think people in the U.S. don't get this, because we haven't had, like... I mean, we have, obviously, Iraq, and, like, that's very awful for soldiers who suffer from PTSD.
Yeah, but, like, the closest thing we have is either you're in the military or you were there in Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, and Pearl Harbor...
Or 9/11, I guess, but...
Right, 9/11. But I think that was also, again, 9/11, very, very traumatic for a lot of people. But that was also a lot more contained. Like, this is the entire, like...
Oh, absolutely.
Country.
And it's a small country. I mean, it's like...
yeah.
I don't even know what the entire population of Bosnia is.
I don't know.
A couple million.
It's
right?
not that.
But it's probably smaller
Yeah,
than New York City.
Yeah.
Which is
anything smaller than New York City.
But I mean, it doesn't even matter because it's an entire state.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's an entire people.
Yeah, and all of them pretty much directly suffered from this.
And in Croatia, and in Serbia, and in Montenegro, like the thing is like
it's not contained to like this one place that we're in. It's everywhere. If it was part of Yugoslavia, like, and all of it is just not mentioned.
Yeah,
in anything.
In almost all like conflicts, there's like one or two or three sides of the story, but that's generally it. Except for like the world wars, which involved a lot of people, but still at that point they were like almost all aligned one against each other. So you were like aligned with one, aligned with the other, or not aligned at all.
Mm-hmm.
But with this conflict, it feels like there are like 16 different sides of each story.
Yeah, you don't know who to share like side with because you can't.
But they're all one people,
yeah.
So it doesn't make like logical sense for it to be so divided, like from an outsider's perspective. So it's so hard because, you know, you go to Srebrenica and you say, how can people survive from like this torture of like living through this kind of massacre? But then it's, you know, it happened across the border in Serbia. It happened across the border in Croatia too. It's just,
yeah,
everyone just killed each other so much. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah. And I just actually wanted to close with a quote that we had from
Bogic.
Bogic. He said, you know, he was talking a lot about unity in Bosnia and everywhere, and he said, if you know my culture, my past, my values, you won't be afraid of me. And I think that really stuck with me because we've seen time and time again, yet again, people just don't learn from their mistakes. Segregation breeds hatred. And if you look at any war or any conflict, that's what it is. It's an us versus them. We are good, they are not. And that's what kind of snowballs and turns into a war or a genocide. You know, the more we kind of don't understand about another people, like, about another culture, and the more we're just like, oh, like, I don't need to do this, like, I don't need to understand it, you are, in a way, feeding this, like, you know, like, feeding the fire almost, but, like, it's definitely not a good thing. So again, in my, like, last post, I was talking about how, like, when in Rome, like, do as the Romans do. Whenever you go to a country, it's, in my opinion, it's like, you know, you have to really understand their culture and stuff, because every country's been through so much, and if you come to Sarajevo just as a tourist, and you don't try to learn about, you know, anything that happened here, you're not going to appreciate it as much as I think you do knowing everything that happened to these people and the way they're so incredibly strong and resilient, and it literally amazes me how they're just picked up their lives and, like, you know, continued to, like, just keep on going, and it really makes me appreciate everything about the city and the people so much more.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've been like shoulder bumped a couple times by like locals here, and I mean it's a tight city, so like all the streets are nice and narrow. But every time somebody shoulder bumps me, and I like want to like lash out and be like, "Hey, what the hell?" You know, get out of my way. It's just like, no, no, like
relax.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like this place. I mean, you can feel all of the history like on every corner too. And I think it was interesting when Mladen mentioned that he said, like, this city has too much history.
Too much.
It has too much history.
Just, like, walking around the city, you see like, beautiful buildings covered in, like, bullet holes.
And mortar shells.
Yeah, you know, you're sitting at a restaurant, you look out the window, the building in front of you is like, riddled with little holes, and you're just like, oh my god, like, I am sitting here eating my little, like, cevape, and
my espresso,
and it's
20 years ago, I could have been killed standing
there.
there.
And then it's crazy because the people that are sitting in the, you know, like, older people are just sitting there like talking in Bosnian, eating their little like bureks and coffees or whatever. And it's like they've all, if they lived in the city, they went through this. They know, like, they know and understand and experienced actually what happened like 20 years ago. And now it's like the guy sitting next to me at the little cafe drinking his little coffee, and like that's crazy to think about for me. That I'm looking at these bullet holes going, "Oh my god, like that must have been really awful." And the person sitting next to me is probably like, that was a bad time in my life.
I mean, the memory that like each street has. I mean, like I'm sure people had like PTSD
Mhm.
incursions like on different street corners when they said, "Oh no, like this is when the grenade hit," oh no,
Mhm.
when all these things happened. And the fact that the funeral procession happened on the main street that used to be called Sniper Alley.
Yeah. And it's been 20 years and people are still waiting for to
Their
like
loved
find
ones.
their loved ones who they know, you know, are dead, but they can't give them that proper burial and you know, like bury them properly the way um they deserve, and it's really sad.
Yeah.
So those are just my thoughts on everything. Hope you guys, it's really long, but I hope you guys watched till the end. Okay. Say bye,
That
Jackie.
was good. Bye.
Alright.